Your biggest security risk doesn't have a heartbeat. Let me show you what I mean. Pull up your identity provider right now. Entra ID, Okta, whatever you're running. Count up your human users. Now go ahead and count your service principals, your API tokens, your service accounts. And if you're deploying any AI agents, let's count those too. In most environments I investigate, that ratio far exceeds 1 to 1. And here's the problem. You're monitoring them still like it's 2015. We've built an entire security program around protecting user accounts. We apply MFA, password policies, and possible travel detection, the works. Meanwhile, the service principals and API tokens multiplied in the background. Every CI, CD pipeline, every microservice, every third-party integration, and every AI agent you're currently piloting. You did remember to remove and disable those accounts right after the pilot finished, though, right? These aren't edge cases anymore. They're the majority of your identity footprint. And most security teams struggle to obtain visibility into what they're actually doing. When I say struggle, what I mean is they can't answer basic questions like which service account touches your customer database today or last Tuesday? And what permissions does that GitHub Actions token actually have? Which API key is making 10,000 calls a day to your directory? The authentication logs that you have show a service principal signed in, which is great, but what did it do after that? And until recently, that question didn't have an answer. But now let's talk about what those attackers know that you don't. Service principals are a perfect target. They don't have password expiration policies and they don't trigger MFA prompts. They often have an excessive amount of privileges because someone needed to get it working 3 years ago and then forgot about it and they never came back to adjust. When they're compromised, they don't generate the behavioral anomalies that trip up user-focused detection. Let's take a look at Midnight Blizzard, the group behind SolarWinds. They compromised Microsoft's corporate environment in January 2024, not with a 0 day, but they had found a forgotten OAuth app in a test tenant that didn't have an AMFA. It had full exchange access, and they sat there and read executive emails for months. Or take into account Storm 0501. They're a ransomware group that targets critical infrastructure, and they hunted for service principals with global admin rules that lacked MFA. Found them, reset the password, and let Entra Connect Sync hand them cloud access. Then, unfortunately, they deployed ransomware across the Azure subscriptions. But the pattern is consistent. Compromise the non-human identity. Enumerate that environment while still invisible. Escalate the privileges, and then execute the objective. By the time you see the alert, that reconnaissance phase, it's over. Now, if you're cloud native, you're affected. If you're running Kubernetes, serverless functions, complex CI/CD pipelines, you're affected. And if you're deploying agentic AI that needs to read and write data autonomously, you're definitely affected. This isn't a problem you solve by reducing API token count. You need these identities to operate. The question is, can you investigate them when something goes wrong? When an alert fires on a service principal, adding credentials to an OAuth app, can you see what that principal did the 12 minutes before the alert? Can you correlate authentication from an unexpected IP with a spike in that graph API enumeration? And can you trace a single access token across every API call that it made? This is where investigation architecture matters. At Command Zero, we treat non-human identities with the same investigation rigor as users. The service principal alert fires. Our platform automatically pulls graph API security, correlates the token identifiers across authentication and API logs, baselines that behavior against normalcy, and then checks directory role memberships for that black radius. You're not writing queries, you're answering questions. Did that service principal enumerate users and roles before adding credentials? Is it operating from its normal infrastructure or residential IP in Belarus? What's the delta between this week's activity and last week's? The Midnight Blizzard attack, with Graph API audit events and the right investigation framework, those 800 GET requests enumerating your environment would surface an investigation timeline, not months later, but during that active investigation and triage. Service principal attacks aren't theoretical. They're in every threat report, and they're only increasing. The question is whether you're ready to investigate them.